Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're setting out on a fascinating historical investigation. We are looking into a largely erased chapter of history, the early days of Brazilian sports, and specifically, the absolutely remarkable women who helped build it. You know, if you look closely at the traditional narratives of sport history, you're going to notice a glaring gap. Entire communities of female athletes have basically been left out of the story. And erasing this history doesn't just leave a hole in the past, it fundamentally changes our understanding of modern sports and who actually gets to claim ownership of the games we love. So we're going to unearth those forgotten legacies, decode the clues left behind, and really shine a light on the women who laid the foundation for the sporting culture we see today.
Think about the late 19th and early 20th centuries for a second. When you picture the dawn of Brazilian sports, where are the women? Usually, our collective memory is completely filled with legendary male athletes and iconic sporting clubs. Okay, let's dive into this, because this historical mystery of the missing female figures isn't just some accident. It's the result of deeply ingrained societal structures that actively marginalize their contributions. They weren't missing from the fields and the courts, they were just missing from the record books.
Section 1. The Missing Sporting Chapter.
Now, this is where the real detective story begins. Researchers today are working tirelessly to uncover a narrative that was heavily obscured by a historically male-dominated gaze. To really grasp this, we have to understand a concept called archival silences. This isn't about someone merely forgetting to file a piece of paper. Not at all. It's the absence of historical records acting as a direct manifestation of marginalization. In early Brazilian sports, the archives were curated by male administrators and journalists who heavily prioritized male achievements. They viewed sports strictly through the lens of hegemonic masculinity, meaning a culture that exclusively prized brute strength, aggression, and intense male bonding. Consequently, women's athletic endeavors were either trivialized as totally frivolous or just completely ignored, rendering their actual achievements virtually invisible to the future.
So how do historians piece together a history that someone essentially tried to erase? Well, they have to get creative. And this brilliantly illustrates the methodology used to reconstruct these hidden histories. Researchers basically have to read against the grain of male-dominated texts to find subtle references to women. For instance, they might find proof of a highly competitive women's team not in the sports section, but buried in a random complaint in the society pages about unruly behavior at a weekend gathering. They cross-reference highly fragmented sources, utilize oral histories from descendants, and employ microhistory techniques. That means they look intensely at one specific club or even a single individual, just to reveal the much broader hidden patterns of female engagement across the country.
Section 2. Barriers to the field.
Why were these women written out in the first place? Well, we need to establish the incredibly restrictive, patriarchal landscape of the time to understand exactly what these pioneers were up against. The obstacles were intense. First and foremost was the delicate flower ideal. Elite Brazilian society adopted strict Victorian norms, emphasizing female fragility and domesticity. Vigorous physical activity was seen as highly unfeminine. Compounding this were completely unfounded yet widely believed medical myths. Doctors actually warned that physical exertion would cause severe reproductive damage, citing bizarre theories like the physical displacement of organs from simply jumping or running. Add in the intense social stigma, the moral judgment, almost zero access to dedicated training facilities, and the societal default that a woman's only place in a sporting event was sitting quietly in a segregated spectator section.
This created a strict, highly gendered divide in early Brazilian society. On one hand, you had the highly visible elite male bastions. Sports like football, rowing, and fencing were heavy, hypermasculine pursuits, focused on rugged discipline and fierce male bonding. On the flip side, you had what were deemed proper sports for women. We're talking gymnastics, tennis, croquet, and recreational swimming. These were designed to be restricted, quiet activities focusing on grace, health, and polite social interaction, rather than intense, sweat-inducing competition.
Section 3. Stealthy strategies for play. Here is where the story turns, and it's honestly amazing. Women were not just passive victims of the system. Instead of accepting defeat, early Brazilian women became active, ingenious strategists. One of their most brilliant tactics was camouflage. They subtly bypassed the rules by framing their participation as purely amateur or recreational. By downplaying any competitive aspects that might trigger social backlash, they completely disguised their physical autonomy. Picture this: women playing a grueling, highly competitive tennis match, but outwardly masking it as just a leisurely, polite garden party to avoid drawing the ire of male administrators. They masterfully passed off serious athletics as mere recreational socializing or civilizing health activities. It was a stealth operation hiding in plain sight.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is exactly how they carved out these physical spaces. When you break down these stealthy avenues, a fascinating pattern emerges. Social clubs and educational institutions each made up a massive 35% of the pathways to play. Women organized tennis tournaments disguised as charity events in social clubs, or they leveraged the new physical education curriculums in schools to their total advantage. They also use philanthropic organizations and informal, private gatherings to play, train, and compete, far away from the heavy scrutiny of the public male gaze.
Section 4. The Forgotten Founders.
It is finally time to reveal the specific pioneers who built this sporting foundation against all odds. We can categorize these incredible individuals into three main spheres. First, in the social clubs, we had the Damas do Esporte, the ladies of sport. These elite women didn't just play. They meticulously organized tournaments and managed the complex logistics of athletic events. Over in education, we had early physical education instructors and the gymnasianas, female students participating in intramural teams. For a young girl at that time, simply joining an intramural team was a radical claim to physical autonomy and teamwork. And then there were the fiercely independent, often anonymous women who organized informal cycling groups or participated in public fairs, directly challenging mobility norms right out there in the streets.
And it is absolutely vital to note the timeline here. While modern, highly organized sports feel like a distinctively 20th century invention, these grassroots pedagogical movements were happening back in the late 19th century, literally before airplanes were even invented. These visionary educators were already adapting European pedagogical models to fit the Brazilian context. They were quietly yet steadily fostering physical coordination, health, and discipline in Brazilian girls, actively proving the immense value of physical fitness to deeply skeptical parents and administrators.
Section 5. A Lasting Sporting Legacy. Let's see how these early, subtle acts of rebellion didn't just fade away into the archives. They directly shaped the broader culture of sports we recognize today. So the crucial point is this. The impact of these invisible architects went far beyond just playing games. They normalized female physical activity, proving once and for all that women belonged in motion. They radically expanded the definition of sport beyond rigid, competitive male paradigms to include a much wider spectrum of movement. They fostered vital organizational and leadership skills. And fundamentally, every single time they took to the court or the field, they challenged the existing power structures. By simply taking up space, they forced society to completely redefine what women were physically and mentally capable of.
To summarize their monumental contribution, the source material offers this really powerful quote. It says, "It is a legacy of resilience, innovation, and unwavering dedication to the pursuit of physical activity, undertaken in a world that was not always ready to embrace it." That is just a profound testament to human endeavor in the face of immense societal constraints.
Which leaves us with this provocative thought to end on. The barriers these women faced might seem like ancient history, but just look at the sporting world today. How do the historical struggles of these forgotten founders mirror today's ongoing fight against the gender pay gap, the lack of media coverage, and the battle for equal representation in sports? Unearthing this history doesn't just correct the past. It directly informs and fuels the modern push for true gender equality. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this changes how you view the foundation of the games we love.